Hello and welcome to this presentation of digital campaigning for small campaigns. The objective of this presentation is to go through some best practices for your campaign so that you can seem bigger than you are, to help establish and validate your campaign, and hopefully answer some of your questions. We're going to go through the objectives as we've just done. I'm going to introduce myself. Then we're going to talk about the differences between digital and traditional campaigning. We're going to talk about the four components of digital campaigning: websites, email lists, Facebook, and Twitter. We could talk about a lot more than that, but those are really where you have to start. If you don't have one of those four, you're missing something. So my name is Ethan Clark. I am the president of Campaign Gears. We're a digital organizing consultancy. We help organizations in the progressive sector campaign better. I formerly was the National Organizing Director for Workers United Canada Council, and I, and along with the rest of my staff, are members of the Canadian Freelancers Union as part of Unifor. We are also certified as Nation Builder experts and Nation Builder architects. Nation Builder is a popular platform that people use for campaigning. We won't be talking about it in this session, though. So why is digital different? Digital provides instantaneous audience feedback, which is different from traditional campaigning in that the feedback that the audience, i.e. the voters, could give you was on election day. The rest of the time you had to just guess at how people would react to the various pieces of communications you were giving them. This new digital technology provides feedback instantaneously, which you can, and in a quantifiable way, which means that you can use it to build a relationship between the voter and the campaign over time, and also to use it to help steer the organization and the campaign forward. It is really true these days that voters' reaction upon hearing of your campaign will be to look you up online. You should expect that any door knock, any literature drop, any advertisement or interaction in public will be followed up with a digital legitimacy check done by the voters that you interacted with. That means that having content on your Facebook and Twitter, website, and YouTube is very important. It needs to be current, and it needs to give a place for people to interact with that content so that you can know that they were there. It's very important that you have a system for following up with those people to make sure that any questions they might have or showing signs of support have been followed up with. Let's not get too stuck on the technology, though. Really, you need, when picking what kind of technology you're going to use on your campaign, the technology comes last. You really need to start with thinking about the people, specifically the people in your campaign. If you have a large group of people on your campaign who just don't have the technical skills or capacity to handle the latest gizmo, it's really not in your interest to use that, even if it may promise the cutting edge. Really, think about the people you have available to you, your volunteers and campaign staff, and then think about your objectives. If you're building a reputation campaign, if you're a small campaign and you're thinking you'll probably run this time and another time before you'll get government, then think about those objectives. You're probably more interested in building leaders than doing a full voter ID. You're probably more interested in finding volunteers and motivating them to stick with you over time. And so that means a lot of interactivity, a lot of working together with folks to build a team, as opposed to more bulk situations where you're trying to really deal with every single voter in your universe, which would dictate a different kind of technological use. Then the final thing to consider before technology would be your strategy. Have you decided that you're going to focus on a certain kind of issue? Have you decided to focus on a certain neighborhood? What are the people in those neighborhoods like? Do they have, are they of a higher educational level? Do they have a higher level of access to digital technology? Do you need to prove to them that you have a handle of this technology? Those sorts of questions. When you're using these various technologies, it can be a bit harder to manage message discipline than on a typical campaign. Typically, the campaigns would have one or two people who were in charge of message, and they would write the piece of literature or make the advertising buy. But in this situation, everyone's involved. Digital campaigning requires all the participants to be involved, and so that means really making sure that folks understand that they have to follow the message of the campaign. And you have to, when crafting that message, make sure that you don't get tricked into thinking that you are your audience. You are much more involved in these issues than anyone else. You are much more educated, and you have already been convinced. So you really have to think about your audience. How are they feeling about these issues, and make sure that you are not talking over their heads. You also, even though in a campaign you can feel like you're saying the same thing over and over for weeks at a time, consistency is very important. People only get the message that you're trying to stick to after they've heard it a number of times. So even though it may feel like you are repeating yourself, you really aren't, because the people in your audience haven't heard you the first few times. You need to repeat it over and over again. To that end, the methodology for getting that message out, so you can repeat it to them over and over again, really starts with your website. Your website is your property on the web. It's your home base, and it starts with your domain name. You need to find something that's easy to remember, fits on your signs, which can actually be kind of troubling these days because so many domain names have already been registered. You may have a hard time finding a name. I would advocate for you to start with a .ca address. You can consider whether you want to get a .com, though they are even harder to get addresses for. There are new addresses now. You can get a .to address, for example, if you're a Toronto candidate. There are other options that you can use, like making a sentence out of your domain name. But really, you got to start with your domain name. If you don't have a domain name, it really is the first thing you got to do. When you're talking about content on your website, think about less is more. Keeping your content down to the barest minimum is probably in your best interest. You don't want to overwhelm your visitors with too much content. The other thing, of course, is that if you're a Toronto candidate, being that our city is so multilingual, you might consider whether it would be to your advantage to have multilingual content. You do have to be careful, of course, that you keep it up, and so that means you need to have that capacity to keep that content fresh in those multi-languages. But if you do have that capacity, and maybe on your volunteer team you have folks who can help you with that, it's really a bonus to be able to speak to people in their native language. Video is the most compelling content you can put on a website. Folks are really quite interested in hearing from the candidate in person, and video has the highest engagement rate of content on the web. People react and respond to it the best. You can actually, on a small campaign, get away with just uploading videos to YouTube that are of the candidate answering questions that they hear on the door. That might be something to consider as a cheap and easy way to get that moving. On your website, frequency of updating really needs to be at least once a week. Try to keep it up at least once a week, so that if someone comes by to visit, especially in the provincial or federal election where things are so slow, so short, that you really need to be updating fairly frequently. You only have 5 or 4 weeks, depending on which level you're talking about. Having a website capacity to do RSS feeds is helpful. RSS feeds are a way that people can put your website into their RSS reader and get updates every time you update something. Someone like a journalist might be doing this if they're covering your area. So if you provide that capacity, and whoever builds your website should be able to offer that functionality. So your next most important thing, other than your website, is your email list. Now, email lists don't seem to be very sexy these days, but really they are much more high. They have a much higher engagement rate than Facebook or Twitter, so they really are the place to start. An average email list should result in a 20 or 40% engagement level with the items that you put out to it. You need to have a platform to use it, though. Don't just use an Outlook or a standard email client. You need to use a email list platform such as MailChimp. MailChimp allows you to send 2,000 emails to a list of 2,000 emails for free. It's something to consider. Nation Builder is another alternative that does similar things, though it is a paid service. When writing your email, the most important thing to think about is your subject line. A lot of folks find that they focus on the amazingly well-written email content, and then they forget about the subject line and don't put any thought into it. The trouble with that, of course, is that if someone's subject line isn't quality, the people receiving that message won't even open it, and so everything inside it doesn't really matter. So the subject line is the most important thing. One rule that you could follow is to write 25 subject lines for every message you send. The reason for doing that is because after you push through the first 5 or 10, you've thrown out all of the boring options, and you might come to a moment of creativity after doing enough of them that you'll come up with a subject line that's really quite interesting and will engage people. So think about really putting a fair amount of brain time into your subject line. Your from settings are important. You need to decide at the beginning of the campaign where the messages are going to come from. You can have them from a person, or you can have them from the campaign. It's probably better. Statistics show that having it be from a person is the best thing to do because humans interact with names more than with organizations. But you need to have the right person to do that. So if that's the candidate, that's great. The message content, though, will need to be from that person. So if you need to speak in the voice of the candidate when you're writing, if you can do that consistently, then it would be great to use the candidate's name. You have to be very concise on this content. People's tolerance for length on email is not very high. You need to really be very short and to the point. One message to the one item to the message only. One call to action to that message only. So really stick to that. The next thing to do after you've done your email list is to set up a Facebook page for your candidate. It used to be, though, that Facebook was pretty much free and was a great place to start. Unfortunately, now they've gone public and they have to provide value for their shareholders. So it really isn't free anymore. The people who have liked your Facebook page haven't seen your content to the same level that they did in the past. It used to be that you could expect that everyone on your Facebook page would see your content, and then last year it dropped to about 20 or 30%, and earlier this year it dropped down to 1%. You can expect that Facebook's promoting your content to 1% of the people who have said that they like your page. That is, unless you pay for it. You really need to make sure that your campaign has a budget line for paying for Facebook content. It needs to be out there. You need to promote your posts so that you get to the people who you need to get to. It's a drag, and it's disappointing that things went that way, but it is the reality of the situation that we are in now. When you're writing that content, really write in the voice of the candidate. Facebook and Twitter are interactive social media, and you really need to speak as a person, and the best person to speak on the behalf of a campaign, of course, is the candidate. In every message, you want to try to think of a reason that people would want to share or like your message. Thinking about that is important, but be careful. New rules from Facebook came down just a few weeks ago saying that explicitly asking for shares or likes is considered spammy behavior and might actually downgrade the likelihood of getting your message out. So try to think of ways that are less obvious, but still humans don't do things unless they're asked. So try to think of ways to prompt people to engage with your content. It really needs to be done. When you're thinking about what to post, think about the fact that video, pictures, text, and links is really how Facebook prioritizes content. They will show more people a video than they will show a picture, and they'll show more people a picture than they will show a text. It's really important to keep in mind, of course, that if you're telling people to come off of Facebook, Facebook doesn't like that. They don't like links to the world outside of Facebook, because then that means that people will be in a place that they can't advertise to. So it really is in your best interest to try to avoid posting links. One way to do that is to post a picture, and in the text, in the description of the picture, mention the website from which you are working. That's considered a picture post, not a link post, and thus gets more people seeing it without having to pay for it. I would suggest, but as I said in my first point on Facebook, do consider paying for promoting posts as much as you can afford. Facebook expects, the dynamics of Facebook really work well with daily posting, so make sure that you're posting daily, and when you're posting, really think about the fact that the only option people have on Facebook is to like or share. So think about ways of making your content something that someone can like. It's hard to like an injustice, so think about creating your posts in a more positive spin, like the solution to an injustice, because people can like that more easily. So finally, on Twitter, you have to understand, of course, that Twitter has far fewer numbers of people involved on it than Facebook. So I really am listing these in order of importance. Your website is first, your email list is second, your Facebook page is third, and your Twitter is fourth. You really need to focus on the first three. But Twitter is important because Twitter is such a political platform. It's really the go-to source for journalism and for other engaged political folks. So you need to make sure that you're on Twitter to make sure that you get validity from those so-called chattering classes. It's largely free, unlike Facebook, which is definitely a bonus, and it really is less focused on original content than Facebook is. So you can share other people's content with impunity. So go right ahead and share that content from other campaigns or from other organizations that care about the issues that you like. You really need to post a couple of times a day, but unlike Facebook, they can be shorter and less involved. So it's easier to do them multiple times a day. In all of these systems, you need to have a database and an info system to make sure that you follow up with these interactions that you have. You probably already have a system for tracking of house calls and visiting people at various meetings and things like that. You need to make sure that you're doing that same follow-up for your social engagement online. People do not trust if you promise to follow up or you mention something on a Facebook comment and then don't follow through. That breaks your bond of trust that you have with those people. So you really need to have a system to make sure that works. You can also use statistics in these various systems for guiding your decisions, and that's really the power of digital campaigning, is that feedback that you're getting from the various voters that you're interacting with. So use a program such as Nation Builder or other systems like that follow your statistics on. You can also use the Facebook Insights panel in Facebook, and there are a couple of apps for doing statistics on your Twitter account as well, so that you can really get a sense of what people are reacting to and use that to guide your movement on the campaign trail. So that is the end of this quick broadcast about digital engagement for small campaigns. I hope that it was helpful. Please leave any questions or other suggestions in the chat boxes where you find this, and hopefully all together we'll be able to improve our digital campaigning on our small campaigns. And good luck to everyone on the campaign trail. This is Ethan Clark from Campaign Gears.